Can you tell us a little bit about the caucus, its vision, its goals, and if you can give us any insight into what the blockchain caucus may be doing over the next few months?
Okay. Basic reason for the existence of blockchain caucus is trying to explain the benefits of how this works. How many of you have to interface with folks that just aren't particularly technical? How many of you actually get yourselves trapped in the difference between having the conversation of here's the benefits of the technology. We can produce types of IDs that are bulletproof if properly written, and you can layer on different levels of permission and all these other things, and you start to talk through the benefits. And we, as people who are interested sometimes in the technology, start talking about, well, here's a node network, and you can have these certified servers over here that they always have to be, their stamp has, and you start to talk about the technology. And one of the things we've tried to do with the Blockchain Caucus is stop sounding like those of us who, live in a more technical world, where if you start every morning reading TechCrunch, you're probably not the person who is the one sitting down trying to sell the benefits. We actually, in the Blockchain Caucus, are trying to help folks understand the benefits of a distributed ledger technology and what it can do up and down society in removing a lot of friction, instead of trying to sound like, hey, I took a programming class, so I have some idea how this works.
Thank you. So when it comes to Congress, aside from the Blockchain Caucus, which is really creating a lot of awareness and providing some bridging between the technologists and Washington, D.C., do you think that there's a need for Congress to legislate in the area of distributed ledger technology or in the cryptocurrency space? And maybe that's two questions that I'm asking you.
No, it's actually an interesting question. Let's first just sort of do blockchain distributed ledger, and the mechanisms there. If you'd asked me a year or two ago, I would have said the most powerful thing we can do is keep Congress as far away from it as possible. But I'm realizing the number of groups I speak to at the bureaucracy level, that you'll have a handful that are just freaky smart, that get it, and the amount of resistance right underneath that. And I'm hoping we'll get a moment here. I want to give you a quick sort of case study to think about of something we're trying to do in Arizona, and what happens when you have a leadership of our Department of Transportation that absolutely gets it, and then the teams below him that are doing everything they can to slow walk it, because ultimately if the technology really does its job, entire departments functionally no longer need to exist. And what do we do as policymakers? What do you, as folks who understand the benefits of the technology, how do you find a way to make the technology the victor and not the bureaucracy?
Thank you for that.
And on the crypto space, my fear is almost, you will get members who will come in and say, well, we want legislation on initial coin offerings, or we want this or that. And my fear is often you'll get members who are talking and they don't completely appreciate the mechanisms. So do you do legislation that maximizes transparency but doesn't blow up the creativity? And there's the problem, is so many of us operate in this sort of this command and control, where we think a coin offering or a token offering is the same thing as a 506B offering, and they don't line up that well. So how do you design a mechanism saying, we're going to give you absolute disclosure, but we're not going to be excessively prescriptive?
And with that, I mean, with the changes that we're seeing in DLT in the technology, which is rapidly changing, you're starting to see even quantum-resistant DLT. How does, I mean, you really did a good job of separating out sort of the technology from cryptocurrency. How do you make sure that Congress legislates without stifling that innovation that's happening very rapidly?
If I knew that, I would be on that side of the tables. You actually have a couple we could do an entire discussion on, can you make actually ultimately a quantum resistant encryptions with the tokenization, of course you can, but have you just now made everything so slow that no one's going to ever use it? And that's actually another thing we need to come back. We need to deal with the discussion of how much bureaucratic resistance we have, saying, well, we love distributed ledger technology, but it's just not fast enough. And I know there's a couple organizations, I'm hoping they're here, that actually have some really neat escrow mechanisms and those things that dramatically speed up processing. My greatest fear with Congress is we also have this bad habit of thinking we know more than we do, writing a piece of legislation and empowering a bureaucracy that the bureaucracy exists to do things, to exist, to regulate, to control, and often by the time they finish a rule set, the technology has already blown by that. And I can give you some simple examples of that on some of the rolling encryption mechanisms. Some of the experiments that have happened in about a year and a half ago, we actually had NIST and a working group of different distributed ledger groups come together just saying, could we build an encryption design standard that would meet all HIPAA, the education privacies, other things, because I have a personal fixation that there's and I know I'm way off track, but this is my real reason for being here.
You're not off track at all.
There's a disruption about to happen in healthcare. How many of you are wearing an Apple Watch that can manage your arrhythmia? How many of you have seen the little things you can attach to your body that do amazing? It is amazing the data sets they can produce. How do you keep that and have it on your phone? How do you make it so it meets all the HIPAA rules, so it's absolutely safe, properly encrypted, but fast enough? And how do you come up with a level of standardization so it's actually useful? What happens if I have the patch? I'm a severe asthmatic. I have the patch that's doing my blood oxygen, helping me dial up and dial down my inhaled steroid. At the same time, I have the watch helping me manage my hypertension. At the same time, I have something over here. And if they're not ultimately producing data in a common format with an absolutely common date stamping, falling into a singular encryption, is it useful? Because one of you is going to have a company that produces an algorithm that functionally takes it, manages it, says, hey, David, you're about to die. And my fear here is, for those of us on the policy side, could we ever say the bedside equipment at your hospital bed or the digital pseuticals you're going to be wearing ultimately will transmit their data in this fashion with this type of common date stamping that will fall into this type of encryption standard? That actually makes the ecosystem actually work. You also know if we get too prescriptive, we're going to miss the next generation of technology. So how do you, as leaders in the blockchain world, distributed ledger world, actually step ahead of us in Congress and say, we have the stuff we did last year with NIST to saying if it meets this level of encryption, it does meet HIPAA, it does meet all these things. Grab those papers we had written and then maybe come up with your own common standard and start to make it so all these digital pseuticals I'm going to be wearing will match up with the bedside medical equipment that will match, and make it so I will have algorithmic health care. Because whether you like it or not, that supercomputer you have in your pocket, that smartphone, is about to become your primary care physician. And we have some great data sets that say with enough, it's actually more accurate than actually talking to a human doctor. It's coming very fast. Will it lay on a distributive ledger so it's safe and you also will always know, because you can set the permissions and who gets to look at it. So it's a bit of a tirade, but that's actually sort of the utopian vision that we must have. Because if we don't have that disruption of using data to change the healthcare costs, we're in real trouble.
I agree with you. And I agree with you. And what one of the problems is, so that is a great discussion about the uses, one of the use cases for DLT. And there are very few members of Congress that could go through that discussion the way that you just did right now with these folks in the audience. So I guess my question for you is, I go into a lot of offices. I've been doing it for 2 years now on blockchain and on DLT and crypto.
No, do you guys will get mental health insurance for where you were? Oh, sorry.
I'm at Paul Hastings Law Firm. Our health insurance is pretty good. So I'm sure it could be better, but it's all right.
It's a joke.
So when I go into a lot of these offices, like, I love going into your office because your staff, they get it. It's a relief. And there are other offices that, are other members that are going to speak today that are really leaders in the space. But generally speaking, we see a lot of, glazed over eyes, people who just can't get their minds around it.
But that actually makes the circle back, and I'm sure you've experienced this. We have to tell the benefits. And if we have a few seconds here at the very end, I want to do a quick case study in our thought experiment. But show up in the blockchain meetings, the caucus, and I'd have 30, 20-somethings that are all freaky smart, and then 3 of us who with gray hair, and I'd bring out the whiteboard, and I would design a node network. And then I would saying, okay, if you have a type, let's do a permissioned node network where these 5 nodes actually always have to agree, but everything else I only need 90% permission, And you'd start to, and I realized no one gave a darn in Congress what I was talking about, and I was talking about the wrong thing. I needed to sell the benefits. Hey, here's a way on my phone I could have my real ID so I can get on an airplane. And here I can go here. Here's my hunting license. Here's my fishing license. Here's also my benefits. Here's my current Social Security account. Here's my last 10 years of my IRS filings. And trying to help understand access like that in a chain would be a revolution. If I could also then start to lay on things like my health data, and then allowing it to be mined algorithmically. And if we have anyone here that does actually blockchain policy, I need you to look at a valley fever bill. None of you care about valley fever. It's a disease, basically. It's a fungi. But the second half of the bill has an encrypted blockchain functioning statute of how you could reach into hospital servers, do your calculations on the other side of the firewall, and bring back your population data statistics back across the firewall. Why would that be a revolution? Anyone here ever do statistics or work for around a company that does drug trials? The number of drug trials that ultimately fail because we can't get enough participants or we can't get enough population data. It's not the drug itself or the experiments itself, or particularly things like valley fever that are substantially an orphan. Just using an encrypted chain, doing your calcs on the other side of the firewall, the amount of population data that's sitting on hospital servers would be a revolution on just sort of doing population statistics for drug trials. That's a real-life example where you could actually really benefit society. You could crash the price of doing a drug trial because there's this amazing amount of data sitting out there that we're not using. But how do you convince that hospital board or the folks at HHS and those things there's a really safe way to do this? And we've actually written it in legislative language and introduced it as a bill. But we attached it to an orphan disease because we couldn't get enough people to actually participate in the valley fever trials for some of the drug testing. But the reality of it is the second half of that bill, that's actually a revolution in the cost. It's another thought experiment of how do we sell the benefits?
Use cases, really,
Exactly.
versus talking about crypto and
Yeah,
that
because
side of and Bitcoin.
it was always one of my intense frustrations. Tokens, crypto was fascinating, but it blinded, and so much of the talent went to the crypto side instead of the societal benefit side of, hey, here's what the management of all this data and one last one. I have a weird philosophy that I think we can do in distributed ledger. I believe you as sovereign Americans own all your own data. And you create sort of an implied societal lease that government gets to look at it. But what's one of the benefits if Arizona tomorrow set up a distributive ledger where, hey, here's your driver's license, here's your nursing certificate, here's your hunting license, here's your last 10 years of your state tax filings, here's all these things. Do you have the right to know that your third ex-wife over here who is looking at your file over here? Sorry, it's a creepy, but it works. And one of the beauties of if a properly designed distributive ledger, it always leaves a thumbprint. Hey, someone was looking at my chain. You could build the levels of permission. I've actually spoken to a lot of very libertarian groups in Arizona that are very concerned about privacy and saying, look, this data already sits out there on government servers. Wouldn't you like a single point of entry and then the ability to know when someone's been looking at your file? Would you be more comfortable? And I think actually there's some ways we can sort of package that and say, look, we gain huge efficiencies, but you as a sovereign individual also get to have a much better window of how your data that's held by government is being used and looked at.
So I am in total agreement. I am passionate about the use cases, which could be farm, even like farm to table and those kind of things, or it could be, protecting IP. I know somebody that's protecting
That's a
like movies. They're protecting every single screen on a DLT, and when somebody makes a change, you can see all that. So I'm passionate about those use cases, but some of it has to do with talking to people in states like Arizona or California, and that's where I hear a lot of it. You are playing a big role in doing this, but how do we bridge that divide between, I almost see it as between the West Coast and the East Coast, and much more the further you go west, to really comprehend like all those use cases and change the dialogue in Washington, not just from, which is very heavy on the Bitcoin crypto side of things, versus the incredible use cases that are going to really change the way things work.
Answer, I think, loops back, sell the benefit. I mean, look, create the benefit. And I must tell you, so far, I'm actually this close to being heartbroken how slowly things have rolled out. There's no reason, in some ways, we should be still having the same conversations. So what's the resistance? Is it the bureaucratic problem? Is it, okay, just because it's, and sorry, I have a little bit of a retentive problem on, just as a thought experiment, because I do this, I did this in an audience in the Phoenix area a couple of weeks. As you know, the Phoenix area is one of the leading spots for testing autonomous vehicles. Okay, do I have anyone here that's also does insurance? Oh, good, then I'll sound freaky smart. So tomorrow, you're sitting in the back of your autonomous Volvo, and it takes a left-hand turn and smashes into her vehicle. Who does she sue? Boom, actually, I compliment you. You're freaky smart. It's functionally you sue the code. How could you make, now the reality, autonomous vehicle, it's constantly building, it has its baseline, and it's piling new data on top of that. But if the base code actually also ran on parts of a distributive ledger, and you don't want to know, I've worked out this node network concept of where it just sits on a couple nodes and then verifies itself later. But all of a sudden, code just became insurable because you're suing him, or you're actually suing the code to keep someone from altering the code, saying, well, you know, she didn't have her blinker on or whatever. You can't do that because it would leave a thumbprint. You can't alter the code without it demonstrating someone touched it. Code being held in a distributed ledger became an insurable item. You could write insurance policies on it. So the thought experiment in Arizona is I've been trying to get our Department of Insurance or my state legislature to actually just write a piece of statute that would say, hey, code held in this fashion can have Arizona insurance wrapped around it. So the drone that's delivering your drugs or this and that, if the code that's actually telling it to drop it on your and not run over your dog is that code is actually held in a distributed ledger, you can write insurance policies on it. Tell that as a use case. Don't try to explain what a node network is. And it's fascinating the reaction you get of, I've done a presentation to an insurance group on that in Phoenix recently. And have you ever had that where you all of a sudden have lots of people thinking, and then all of a sudden someone in the back figured out, I can make money on this. And now they're giddy. Help us sell the fact this solves one of the big problems on autonomous vehicles. How do you insure the darn things? You insure the code, and now we have a format where you can hold the code and make it insurable. You just brought in financial services, the insurance industry, others to understand the benefits. So that's one of my goals, particularly with the Blockchain Caucus, is I'm no more trying to explain how the technology works, sell the benefits and get those, and help us get a couple states to actually put this into their state insurance code or state policy and watch the explosion of the need for the technology in the industry that way, because people will say, I found a way to make money on it.
So, Congressman, thank you so much for being on the forefront. Most members of Congress cannot speak this way about the issue, so really admire what you're doing. I think, are we out of time?
Actually, I think we'd like to, if the Congressman wouldn't mind, do a few Q&A with the audience. Is that okay?
Only if the questions are really simple. No, shoot. No, go ahead.
And also,
and let me stand up just a little bit so I can see. All
I
right.
will just say,
shoot.
This is the audience that's actually bringing things to
look,
light.
I can't express my heartbreak so far. There's some of the things that aren't that complicated. And I know you've talked about it around Capitol Hill. How to keep us from doing barriers, but I think some of you are going to have to find warriors inside some of the governmental bureaucracies who are willing to take a chance. And one of the ways you stay employed in government is don't make a mistake. And there's going to be mistakes. Sorry, shoot.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. A question about this. I understand the importance of making it real, which is really what you're talking about, so that people can embrace the benefits rather than talk about the technology, and make it easy for people to gravitate towards the end benefit. And so there's more development and more agreement. Let's go back to this question about the car that you talked about, autonomous driving. You're suggesting that the code is the liable party. I'm concerned about we taking more and more responsible fiduciary people out of society. That the code is really somebody have commissioned that code. Somebody have asked that person to commission that code, to write that code, either correctly, comprehensively, or insufficiently. If that person or that entity is the one who is responsible for that code, why are we insuring the code? Why are we not insuring the potential bad actor who commissioned the code?
Yeah.
So instead of suing the code or insuring the code, which is ever changing, it's really, we are saying not the burger that killed people, it's the people who suggest that burger is your best meal that kill people, and that we shouldn't be insuring against the burger. We should be insuring against the people who are pushing the burger to the masses.
Okay, and look, you're actually bringing up something I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about. Who else has a craving for a hamburger right now? But it's more than that, because the reality of it is the reason I believe the code has to be what's insurable is if you're going to write the insurance on the code, you're obviously going to grab the code, run your stress on it to make sure. So in a weird way, the fact you're insuring the code actually is a proofing on the code. So if trying to insure, hey, I'm going to insure the company that wrote the code, you're starting to get 2 steps away, particularly if that code becomes somewhat, the base of it becomes universal. Need you to go a step further. How many of you have ever dealt with smart contracts? Okay, in Arizona, actually my office helped write some legislation a couple of years ago for my state legislature on smart contracts. Well, the fact of the matter is a smart contract should be able to also have an insurance policy on it. Well, you're insuring actually the code that says, hey, every time this happens, this payment goes out, this title transfers this over. It's those steps. The whole concept of a smart contract is I'm trying to actually remove the fragility of people, of other things. I need to actually be able to ensure the code that makes the steps happen. So don't even think of the autonomous vehicle. Think of something like smart contracts. Think of some of the other automated steps we're trying to create in society to remove the friction. And that's why if we need the ability to actually make it insurable. What happens when things like chains of title, chains of custody on even a grocery item goes back, and you're trying to say, we're going to do a certain insurance that
Supply chain.
we met all the rules within the supply chain. To try to pick out an individual actors or individual company or individual this to insure them, instead of ensuring that the code actually did certify all the steps, I think it's a more elegant way to get there, because all of a sudden now the person writing the insurance, the company writing the insurance, is the one who comes back and does the proofing. They're not going to write an insurance wrap on a smart contract without looking at it and saying, okay, looks like the code is good. So in a way, it's a non-governmental proofreader, if I have a simple way to phrase it. So that's where that thought process has partially come from.
Hello, Representative. We actually met 2 years ago.
Did I do anything I have to apologize for?
No. We met 2 years ago. I was actually working for the state of Delaware at the time.
Okay.
And I'm one of those pioneers with the arrows in the back, because Delaware was very forceful, and then they pulled back, as you know.
Delaware was leading the charge on some great.
Exactly.
And it broke my heart because some of them they backed away from.
Yes, they did, and so I share your heartbreak. You see a lot of activity up front and close, especially in Arizona, and you've got a lot of great ideas. And I'm wondering why you think it's in Arizona. You said you have a department head in transportation who's gung ho, but the tech folks are not. What do you think they can be doing in Arizona to move forward with some of the really innovative policies and projects that you have discussed here today?
Do I have anyone from IBM in the room? Yes. Okay. IBM comes in the door, and they're offering a package of saying, we're going to fix these things for you. We're going to do this gain sharing and da-da-da-da. And they'll often, right, and look, we've had great experiences with IBM on some of the things you've done for us in Arizona on our motor vehicle department and licensing registration. But how does that same company that has a bunch of freaky smart talent say, oh, by the way, we can continue to do it this way, and we'll add these sorts of security. But you do realize, if you would allow us to hold this on this chain, over the next 10 years, you could have this additional revolution. turns out the very contractors that often have the relationships with these local, state, county, whatever governments, I believe we keep selling what we're comfortable with. And the procurement officers keep buying what they're comfortable with. And I was trying not to actually say that, but there was, as you know, a couple articles of why did the utopianism die in Delaware. And it's because they had this incredible vision, but no one else had done it. So what does a bureaucracy automatically do? Is we go, what's safe? How do you get the really smart contractors that are out there who figured out how to deal with the craziness of government procurement and say, here's your box, it looks like everyone else's box, but do realize we could also make part of this box run on this ledger, that over time you could add all these other features and it would be safe? Turns out I need the folks that actually have the relationships with those procurement staff to be the evangelists on where the technology can take them. And part of what I've been pitching in Arizona to my Department of Motor Vehicle, the head of our ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, is freaky smart. Halankowski. Go talk to him, sell him something brilliant. But I'm saying, hey, we should hold, all right, I'm going to do this just real quick. Our driver's licenses in Arizona aren't real ID. So in 20 months, I have 4 million Arizonans who are about to line up at MVD offices and say, I need a driver's license or an ID that will let me get on an airplane. Now, that's assuming the shutdown and TSA is still working. But I'm assuming 20 months from now, we will find a way through this. Okay. Right now, they're saying, well, we're going to work on the technology where someone at home can lay out their passport, their birth certificate, this, that, take pictures of them, and we'll produce a real ID. It could sit on the phone. Okay, brilliant. Now let's go to the next step forward. Okay, let's take the pictures of it, have Homeland Security accept that, but then let Arizona hold that on a chain, have some of the nodes actually be sort of certified, because if you all of a sudden used that, solving that problem of my 4 million Arizonans that won't have ID in 20 months to get on an airplane, that's a crisis coming. We've already talked about the techno-utopian part of we could take pictures of these things, the algorithm in the back can certify it, hold it on a chain. Because who else here in their head right now says, wow, so you built this chain for the real ID, now I could put the person's Arizona nursing certificate. I could put their fishing license. I could put their vehicle registration. I could put, all of a sudden, if the first state that actually starts to build a robust chain with really good processing time, and it may mean with different levels of permission, you actually build different types of escrowing if speed becomes a problem. And if anyone ever wants to talk about that, I've actually built a whole little chart that shows different ways to do it, and which I'm already probably 3 years out of date because I half the time don't know what I'm talking about. But my circle of logic comes back to, we have a crisis coming in my state and several others that don't have real ID. It's coming very fast. Could that crisis be the opportunity to build a state-based chain and now think of everything else that could go on that? If we sat in this room, we could come up with dozens of items, and the societal good that could come from that. So do you sell the chain or do you sell the solution and then whisper the cotton candy part saying, oh, you do understand, even though you're the Department of Transportation, you could actually be the place that holds the hunting license, that holds the certification that you have a real estate license, that holds all these other things, and my ability on the phone using my thumbprint, my facial, my password, I could actually walk in and say, look, I'm a doctor, can I actually have credentials to work in your hospital, instead of right now where it takes a couple months for a hospital to get all the pieces of paper to allow a doctor to go work on the floor. I mean, it's absurd, the frictions that are out there, because we're still halfway between this paper society and this and electronic society. So do you see the experiment I'm giving you? find places that need a solution, sell the basic solution, and then expand it, saying, over the next 10 years, there's all these other things that could sit in the chain, and how much more efficient would living in Arizona be?
Yeah, it's actually working.
Ms. Representative, one more question.
And sorry, I know that was a long answer,
No.
but it should actually get the juices flowing. You get to choose.
I was going to say, you get to, you bet.
Is this working? Yeah. So you're a member of Congress, so federal legislature, you guys are doing great stuff. The lady from Delaware talked about trying to do, you've spoken about things that are happening in Arizona. There's clearly kind of the locus of a lot of where the change can happen lies with the states.
Mm-hmm.
You spoke about insurance regulation, that used to work at insurance regulating a state agency, so I'm somewhat familiar with that. How does your caucus liaise with or communicate the positive benefits of this technology adoption to what need to be your state partners? You can't get insurance contracts written on code if you can't get the State Department of Insurance to buy into that, and that's a 50-state plus the NAIC operation.
I'm going to give you a slight, I'm not going to completely answer your question because your question is very broad, but I'm going to give you a little, you just need one to be successful. And I think it becomes, Delaware had brilliant ideas, and it's still talking about those same brilliant ideas instead of jumping. There's different states, because of their political environment, their structures, that are more risk tolerant than other places. The reason I use the real ID driver's license example is it's a real problem. In 20 months, coming out of August, with this 2020 election about to happen, even the political class says, I'm going to have 4 million Arizonans lining up trying to get a real ID driver's license in the middle of the Phoenix summer before an election cycle. So how do you find that type of fragility and go and say, we're going to help you on the benefit over here, but also, as long as you're doing this, let's design a permissioned level of chain and at least build the infrastructure, because then we have all these other things that state government could attach to. And then eventually, when one state is successful doing that, one municipality is successful, you'll, I think, have your proof of concept. Okay, the very last slide. How many of you have ever seen that poster of all these penguins on the side of an iceberg, and they're all looking over, and the bottom of the caption says, well, just jump. It was supposed to be motivational, just take the leap. You do realize why they're all looking and pushing each other is they're trying to see if there's any killer whales in there, who's going to get eaten. So they're all pushing to see who, hey, Bob got munched on. Okay, this is a bad time to go in the water. I need one of you to jump. And yes, some are going to get munched on by killer whales, but welcome to IT.
Actually, how many people in this room have already made the jump?
Help us sell it. And the next thing, and then as we leave, because I know we're over time, one of the other things the Blockchain Caucus is trying to do, without being too scary or consuming massive amounts of caffeine, is start to help the unified theory of people's heads saying, yes, this is about the supply chain here, but understand all the other things. So once I have that network, that node network built, I could build other levels of permission and all these other things. I could do my personnel management. I could do my benefits. I could do all these other things on those networks. That's actually where I need a success at the state level, doing the first one, and then we build upon that. Just keep helping us explain the benefits to society of just information management. We're even having a weird conversation in Arizona of taking parts of our homeless population. We right now produce IDs for them. that last about 3 weeks because they lose them. Trying to say, I'm going to give this homeless population the ID, but at the same time, we're going to actually build a chain that keeps also their information and then the benefits that they're entitled to, because the amount of times we keep rebuilding each individual's file, that actually should make a lot of folks who are wanting to do social good giddy, but you also think it through how that can expand. And so that's our job, is to keep telling those stories. Hey, thank you for letting us come do this.
Thank you, Congressman. Keep doing what you're doing.